We're going to go over two of Lionel's best trackside accessories, the 342 Culvert Loader and the 345 Culvert Unloader. These two accessories, when they're working perfectly, are absolutely beautiful, but there is any number of things that can go wrong or out of adjustment to keep them from working. And for that reason, most of these are not really working on today's layouts. We're going to go through both of these accessories today and show you what you can do and the things to look for that make them work incorrectly. Now here's how they're supposed to work when everything's working correctly. The traveler goes across the beam. Once the weight reaches the bottom, the magnet comes down, attaches to the culvert, and lifts the culvert up into the socket of the traveler. Once that happens, the weight starts rising to permit the whole thing to travel across, and the culvert will hit the end of that plastic surface and the magnet will slide off. Then the culvert rolls down to the loader, which we'll show you next. Now, this weight has to travel very freely, and you have to make sure that the string is wrapped around the pulley just like it's shown here. It's very easy for this string to come off the pulley and be behind it, and you'd never notice it. If the magnet or the surface on the plastic hasn't been cleaned, it'll become corroded over the years, and this could happen to you. As it gets over to the end and tries to slide off, it sort of hangs up on the end of the culvert, and then everything jams. On your layout, once you've unloaded all the culverts, you'd use your switcher to move the car up, move it up just to the end of the base. Now here's how this works. The tongs grab a culvert, drop it in. Several things have to happen here. The travel on the tongs has to be just right. Now watch how this plastic tong to the right slides over the top of the culvert and then latches. When it drops it, it has to drop it before the traveler starts moving back. We'll show you how to adjust that if that's not the case with yours. Most of what goes wrong with the culvert loader involves 40 years of grit and grime and dirt, so we need to go completely over this accessory to make sure that everything is clean. Only when it is clean and everything is working properly are we going to be happy with the results. The first thing we need to do is to look at this traveler and the beam that it travels across. Let's push the pivot swing arm down like that and get it out of the way. It's made of spring steel, so it won't hurt to push down on it like that. Okay. Notice how the tongs move back and forth like this. You need to be sure that all of this area is clean, free of grit and dirt, free of oil. It doesn't need to be oiled, it just needs to be nice and dry, and it needs to move smoothly. Maybe you need to put a little bit of graphite powder in there if you think it doesn't move very smoothly. That might help, but on this you want to leave oil off of these parts. This beam is really subject to a lot of corrosion because a lot of these accessories were kept in a moist atmosphere like a basement. It has to be perfectly smooth on top for these rollers to roll across and make it work correctly. If you do find corrosion on this beam, just get a common Scotch-Brite pad like this one and rub the surface of the metal until it's smooth. Whatever you do, pass up the temptation to use steel wool. You should never use steel wool anywhere near Lionel trains or O-gauge trains because there's so many magnets involved in the engines and the motors on the engines and magnet traction on the wheels that it draws all that wool up in there, those steel particles, and it ruins the operation. Get a 1/4-inch socket wrench, go right to the chimney there, and there's a nut in there. Just loosen that nut up and remove the roof. There we go. This is the pivot arm. The pivot arm needs to flow smoothly across this ridge on the edge of the building. The pivot arm is held on by this E-clip. So let's carefully remove the E-clip. There we go. Then lift up the pivot arm and set it aside. And now we can just lift the building off. And that exposes some of the mechanism, but we still need to remove this base. To do that, you need to loosen the screw here. Let's get it off. And now we carefully lift this whole base up, and this is kind of a threading procedure where you have to lift it up and kind of lift it off the mechanism. There. There we go. Now I'm going to turn this on and I want you to see how this operates. This is a pulley that has a string attached to this spring, and it goes back to a vibrating motor back here. This pulley has gear teeth on it that drive this gear, and that gear has an offset where this arm is attached, causing this to go back and forth. That's what gives you the motion on the Traveler to go back and forth and drop the culvert into the car. I've reattached this sweep arm because I want to show you the proper travel on this conveyor. Now on this one, the conveyor comes over and stops at exactly the right point to grab a culvert, moves over here, and drops the culvert exactly over the car. That's the most common problem with the culvert loader. That gets out of adjustment, and I'm going to show you how to make that right. To do that, you need to bend this bracket right here. So let me take this off and we'll show you how to bend that so that you don't damage anything and that you get the proper adjustment. If you saw it going too far that way on yours, hold this part right here down at the bottom like that, and then just tweak this a little bit like that. You want to bend this flat beam in here. Keep adjusting that until that travel becomes absolutely perfect and it drops the culvert in the right place every time and it picks it up the right place every time. To check to see if this has been done correctly, reattach this sweep arm and roll a car up into position. And position means that the coupler of the car should be right at the edge of the base. Now, let's attach the sweep arm onto the conveyor, and we're going to manually load a culvert into here since we don't have the building attached. There we go. And we'll see if it drops it correctly onto the car, because if it drops it correctly on the ramp of the car, then you can almost be 90% assured that it's going to pick it up correctly from the building's ramp. So let's see how it does. Well, that looks good. So that means that when we get the building back together, we'll check that, but we're pretty sure it's going to pick it up at exactly the same correct point. Now let's get into the heart of the mechanism, and that is this little vibrating motor. In order to service that or to look and see how cleanly it operates, we need to pop this little E-clip off of the big gear and then carefully lift that gear and the bracket straight up and off. We'll set that aside. Now you see a coil, a string that wraps around this pulley and attaches to this spring right here. How smoothly this works depends a great deal on the tension of this spring. So you may have to adjust the string by loosening it and retying it onto the spring. But now watch how this works. The vibration of this mechanism is pulling this wheel in a counterclockwise direction just a fraction of an inch at a time. It vibrates so fast it appears to be a nice fluid motion. This is what it looks like when it's working correctly. This also has an E-ring. Let's snap that and pull it off. Get the screwdriver in here correctly. There we go. And we're going to lift the string off of the pulley. And then let's take the pulley off the post. Take that Scotch-Brite pad again and just wrap it around the post and give them a little buffing. There. Let's clean the inside of the pulley by just getting a piece of paper towel, push it in there, and pull it through and make sure that there's no foreign material or gunk or old grease in there. Get it nice and clean. And do the same thing with the gear that we took off earlier. Put it through the gear's center Get it nice and clean. There. Now, we ought to be ready to put this back together and see if it turns smoothly. Okay, let's reassemble. Let's put the pulley on first, slide it on the shaft, and take our little E-ring, the snap ring, and put it back on. Okay, he runs. All right, at this point in time, just put one little drop of oil right on the shaft and the pulley so it spins nice and freely like that. The next thing we need to do is thread this string back onto the pulley. There we go. All right. And then we need to replace the sweep arm bracket and this gear, sliding both of them down on their pins at the same time. There we are. And we'll put the last E-ring snap over the pinion of this gear. Okay, the last thing we do is put a drop of oil on that shaft. There we go. And now let's test its motion. That looks like it's working nice and smoothly. Now let's carefully position the base of the building back over the mechanism. Make sure that the traveler is pushed out of the way over on this side, and also take these wires and sort of hold on to them so that they don't slide out from underneath and get trapped. Now there's two tabs on this side that need to locate into some holders, and then one screw over here. All right, the next thing we need to do is put the red building back on here. Now we position the sweep arm and put his little E-clip back on. Let's bend the sweep arm down and attach it to the traveler. Position the roof. And reattach the nut onto the posts. There we go. Let's put a culvert or two on here and see if the sweep arm and the conveyor pick it up at the correct location. Well, it's working beautifully. Always remember that when you're running this accessory that you stop it with the traveler over here. A lot of people, including myself, sometimes stop the traveler over here, drive the train away, and the next boxcar hits the traveler. Well, that just about takes care of it for the culvert loader. Now, let's see what we can do to improve or to show you what to look for on the culvert unloader. The first thing we should do is inspect the culverts themselves. We can't have culverts that look like this. This has got 30, 40 years of corrosion on it. I'm going to show you how to make a little tool that'll clean these up in no time. Get something that you can put into a drill, let's say this small screwdriver, and wrap enough tape around it that you can slide the culvert on and it will stick. Okay, we'll take this and put it into an ordinary drill. Tighten the chuck. There we go. Now, get that same piece of Scotch-Brite that we used earlier. Once again, make sure that you don't use steel wool. And just hold the Scotch-Brite carefully around this while you polish it, like this. There we go. That looks much better. When this accessory was originally built 40 years ago, there was a piece of cloth covering this magnet that gets trapped in between these two halves of plastic. Well, the cloth can be gummed up or maybe it's missing altogether. Rather than put a piece of cloth on, you could put something as simple as 2 layers of masking tape and that'll cure the problem. And the reason we're using 2 is because if it's only 1, there is still too much strength in the magnet to release the culvert. But I have found that if you put 2 layers on there, it works out just about perfect. Now another problem that you may encounter is this. Notice how the magnet has dropped down and picked up the culvert too far toward the outside of the freight car. When that happens, the culvert tilts. That could cause it to hang up over here on the ramp. The traveler will come over only so far as this pin right here will let it move. That pin is adjustable so that if it's coming over too far toward the outside of the freight car, all we need to do is to bend that pin a little more toward the other side. And that will stop the traveler in the right spot. Now, just like the culvert loader, the unloader comes apart by removing one screw here on the end, and then the far end of the plastic just seats in a couple of tabs. So we can remove the building on this one because the building doesn't have anything to do with the action. And we can watch the mechanics and see how it's supposed to work. You have the vibrator right here. Here is that same pulley that we saw on the unloader, or excuse me, on the loader. That has a string going around it to a spring. That operates this gear, turns the piece of motion picture film that you see here. And you see this little pin on it? Well, attached to that pin is a single string, but both ends are attached here. One of the more critical points on the culvert unloader is where this is attached to the film. When the film comes up around the end of the sprocket, this has to swivel very, very smoothly. On the one that I have here, when I first got it, it didn't do that because there was quite a bit of corrosion built up here and here. Well, I cleaned that, and I think it may be a good idea to put a drop of oil on that just to make sure that it doesn't get any rust or any corrosion on there at all, and it will help it make sure that it swivels every time. And when it's in operation, it swivels around the end just perfectly like this. If you find this accessory and you want to rebuild it, the two most common problems you're going to find is either this 16mm film is cracked or broken, or the thread is rotted. If either of these two situations present themselves, you need to replace the thread or the film. You should do both at the same time. Let's show you how to do this because it's not really as hard as it may look at first, as long as you follow that diagram showing you how to string that string through all the pulleys. The first thing you need to be sure to do is get a string that is a nylon string and not a monofilament string, but a nylon string like a fishing line. That has to be in order for everything to work properly. Begin by removing the whole mechanism from the base of the accessory. Believe it or not, that's done with just one screw. You remove this screw right here, and then there are two tabs in the back. You lift those tabs out, and it's free. Now this is a spring-loaded sprocket, so we can remove the film like that. This piece right here, complete with the swivel, is available from some of the parts suppliers in O-Gauge Railroading magazine. When you put this back on, position a loop of film like that, hold the sprocket that's spring-loaded like this, slip it over the end, like that, then bring it up to the other sprocket, and snap it over and check that the teeth are engaged properly. This one's still off a little bit down here. There. Okay. At this time, also notice that when we put this tab and this tab down in the base, we want this swivel to be on the outside of the film, facing us, and this should be on the bottom. Once this is attached, using your hand on the gear, rotate this around until the swivel is right there, right at the edge of this string retainer. It's at this point that you need to be for the magnet to be at its lowest end of travel. Now this magnet is probably just a little bit lower than it needs to be, obviously, because it doesn't need to go that low to pick up a culvert. But you should set it so that it should be right about here. Using the diagram showing how the thread strings through the magnet and the pulleys, bring both ends of the string down and thread them through the swivel right here. Pull the excess string out until the magnet rises to the level that you want it, which is about right there, and put a drop of glue right here to hold it in place. Be careful not to get any glue on this string guide or on the film or the sprocket. Once the glue has set, move it around a little bit to a position where you can tie a knot and attach the string permanently, and then cut off any excess string so that the knot is very close, like you see it here. Well, that takes care of this string, but there's one other piece that we need to show you, and that's this one over on this side and how it works on this weight. To kind of better show that, what we need to do is turn the board around so that you can see this other side better. There. The string that we want to look at now is the one that goes from the traveler across and over this pulley right here. Then it wraps around the pulley on the weight and comes up and ties off right on this screw. When you replace this string, just run the traveler all the way over to the far side and stop the mechanism. Then attach your spring, wrap it around the weight, and pull it up and attach it so that the weight has just a little bit more to go before it reaches the top. Just make sure it's not completely at the top. Now once that's attached and you've trimmed off the excess, watch what happens to the weight as the traveler comes across. Now we're at the far travel of the traveler. The weight is down here and it's still trapped in this slot. So we've got plenty of travel here for the weight and a little bit of slop here on the end so that we know that it's not going to come out. That's about right. Everything should work properly when it's like that. The last thing we need to check is the very heart of the mechanism, and that's this coil and spring and the string, the vibrating motor that causes this pulley to turn. So we'll lift the string off the pulley like that. And then we'll snap the E-clip off and lift the pulley out. Now, in all of these that I've ever worked on, I've never seen any necessity to remove this sprocket or clean the shaft, but sometimes this one gets a little gummed up. So let's do this one the same as we did the one for the Culvert Loader. So let's put the pulley back on. Next thing we do is put the E-clip back on and snap it in place. There. Now let's slide that little string back over the pulley. There we go. And the last thing I want to point out too is you may have to adjust how much spring tension there is on this spring, because over 30 or 40 years this spring may not have the same tension it used to. So you might have to remove the string and get it up 2 or 3 more coils on the spring so it exerts a little more pressure. That's what I've done here, as you can see. Last thing we do is put a drop of oil right on the post here. Put the building back on the accessory. There's 2 tabs that slide into slots here and 1 screw to be attached to this end. Well, let's put the bridge back in. And that completes reinstalling the Culvert Loader with the unloader. And now we've got 2 excellent working post-war Lionel accessories. I do want to take the time to point out one thing. A lot of people believe that you can take either or both of these accessories and set them on a carpet or a floor and put track on them, and they'll work well. Well, that's never the case. I don't care what Lionel originally told you, but because these have a vibrating motor inside, you have to fasten the bases down to a table for them to work well, because only when they're fastened down will the vibration of that motor translate to movement in that belt or movement in this arm. If the bases are loose, the vibration gets into the base so much that you don't get a good operating accessory. That's true of the Culvert Loader and unloader, that's true of the log loader, that's true of the barrel loader. Almost anything Lionel makes, it needs to be fastened down to work properly.